He walked past it for 10 years. Pretended it was nothing. A wrinkle in the yard. A joke the earth was telling. But the earth doesn't joke. Dawn in small-town Iowa moves slow. The kind of slow that makes coffee taste stronger and memories sit closer to the skin. Harold Wilson, 75, veteran, farmer in retirement, stepped onto his porch and listened to the board's answer with a friendly creak. Flag raised. Mug warm. Breath steady. Same as always. The light slid over the maple leaves and found the back of his house. White paint, chipped corners, windows that drank in sunrise. Beyond the garden, beside the weathered shed, the ground lifted. Not much. Just enough to bother the eye. Years ago it was a lump. Then a bump. Now, a real mound, hard to ignore unless you were trying. He had tried. He trimmed hedges. Painted the railing again. Fixed a hinge that didn't need fixing. Old hands like work. Work keeps the mind pointed forward. But every loop from porch to shed tugged his gaze to the same place. That slow, stubborn rise of dirt. It was wrong in a way he couldn't name. Harold knew soil. He knew how water pushes and frost heaves and roots wander. He had stood in fields long enough to read the land like handwriting. This wasn't runoff. This wasn't a mole's fancy. This was a shape. A decision underfoot. His daughter, Mary, had noticed. "Want me to bring the boys and help you level it?" she asked once. He laughed it off. "Waste of sweat," he said, and changed the subject. She heard the iron in his tone and let it go. The grandsons didn't. They climbed it, the way boys climb anything. King of the hill. Arms out. Laughter brand new and reckless. "Careful," Harold called, half smiling. Under the smile, a prickle. The kind that makes the hair along your arms think for itself. Nights were worse. After the town fell quiet and the cicadas stitched their thin metallic chorus through the trees, moonlight turned the mound from a bump into a silhouette. It looked deliberate in silver. Almost rectangular. Almost boxed. That word bothered him. Boxed. He would sip water, tell himself not to be dramatic, and fail. Memory is a patient animal. It watches you work. Watches you sleep. Then it walks in. The humid weight of jungles he never wanted to see again. The rubbery thud of rot and rain. The quick electric crack of gunfire that could split a day in half. Faces of boys who joked one evening and didn't come back the next. He had carried all of that home and buried it without shovel or ceremony. Buried it deep. Or so he thought. Spring came hard with rain. The garden loved it. The mound grew, soft side slumping, edges blurring, height a little taller than before. As he planted seedlings, it sat inside the corner of his vision like a word you can't remember but also can't forget. He tried to explain it to himself. Roots. Settling. Animals. Let it be, he muttered, as if the ground could hear him. But the ground kept answering with the same answer. Rise. One afternoon the irritation flashed hot and quick. He was tired of being pulled by a piece of yard. He set the shovel by the back door and told himself no. Not today. Then dusk laid a pale band over the grass, and the mound's line sharpened again. The breath in his chest changed. Long in. Long out. The kind of breathing a man learns when hesitation can kill. He didn't say the decision out loud. He didn't need to. Morning after rain, he would go to the shed. He would take the old shovel with the tape handle. He would walk out to that quiet, stubborn hill. And the earth, whatever it was trying to tell him, would finally have to speak. The morning smelled of wet grass and iron. Clouds hung low, heavy with leftover rain. Harold stood on the porch with his coffee, eyes locked on that patch of raised soil behind the shed. It looked larger again, swollen, almost proud. The decision that had been circling in his head for weeks finally settled. Enough waiting. He set the mug down, went to the shed, and opened the old wooden door. The scent of oil, dust, and time rolled out to meet him. Every tool had its place. He reached for the shovel, the one with the cracked handle he had wrapped in tape years ago. The weight felt familiar, almost comforting, the way an old rifle once had. He stepped into the yard. The ground gave slightly under his boots, soft from the rain. He stood before the mound. It was quiet, no birds, no wind, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The first thrust broke the silence. The blade sliced through the damp soil with a hiss, the sound of effort and purpose. He lifted the first clump and threw it aside. Another. Then another. Each movement found its rhythm, a steady pulse of muscle and memory. His back ached, his breath came in short bursts, but the rhythm steadied him. It reminded him of the trenches, of digging because you had to, not because you wanted to. In minutes, a shallow pit began to form. He leaned on the shovel, wiped his brow with his sleeve, and took in the sight. The earth looked darker now, rich, deep, like it had something to hide. He dug again. The next strike met resistance. A dull clang. Not rock. Not root. Metal. Harold froze. His fingers tightened around the handle. He pressed the blade down again, gently this time, and heard it, the clear, hollow ring of something man-made. He crouched, brushed away the mud with his hands, and there it was, a corner. Rusted, hard, and undeniably human. A box. The world tilted for a second. The sounds of the yard faded until all he could hear was the slow, heavy beat of his own heart. He dug faster now, careful but desperate. The more he uncovered, the clearer it became, large, rectangular, sealed by time. When he finally freed it, the box gave a soft sucking sound as the wet earth released its grip. It landed beside the hole with a thud. He sat back, breathing hard, staring at it. The surface was rough, streaked with corrosion, but still intact. Whoever buried it had meant for it to last. A latch clung to the front, rusted shut. He tried it with his fingers. It didn't move. He pried at it with the tip of the shovel. The metal groaned, then snapped. The lid shifted slightly but refused to open. Harold hesitated. His chest felt tight. Every instinct from his years in uniform screamed caution. Still, he couldn't walk away now. He wedged his fingers under the edge and lifted. The hinges screamed in protest. The smell of wet soil and age hit him in the face. Inside, bundles. Wrapped tight in oilcloth, lined neatly, deliberately. His stomach turned. The dull glint of brass peeked through the folds. He knew that color. He knew that shape. Ammunition. For a long moment, Harold couldn't move. The rain-damp wind brushed the back of his neck. He swallowed, knees heavy against the grass. This wasn't junk. It wasn't tools. It wasn't harmless. Whatever was buried here didn't belong to him, but it was now his responsibility. He stood slowly, eyes locked on the open box. The veteran in him rose, old instincts whispering of safety, of distance, of calling someone. But another voice, older still, said nothing. Just waited. The shovel leaned beside him, the soil dark and open. And in the quiet backyard of an Iowa morning, Harold realized that the ground had been keeping a secret for decades, and he had just broken its silence. For a long time, Harold didn't move. He just knelt there in the damp grass, the shovel half buried beside him, his breath shallow and uneven. The open box stared back like an eye from another century, rusted, patient, unblinking. He brushed aside one of the oilcloth bundles with trembling fingers. The fabric was stiff with age, slick with residue that smelled faintly of oil and earth. Inside, beneath the folds, brass glimmered in the muted light, rows of cartridges, some still gleaming through the corrosion. Beneath them, something heavier. He reached in carefully and lifted a solid, familiar weight. A grenade. His throat tightened. He had handled hundreds of them in the jungle, decades ago, knew the balance, the curve, the danger even before his eyes confirmed it. This one was pitted with rust, but intact. Unpredictable. Deadly. He set it down as though it might breathe. A shiver crept through him. Not from fear exactly, but from recognition. That unmistakable scent of metal and oil, the way the air seemed to hum when you were too close to something that could erase you. He covered the explosives back up, swallowing the tremor in his hands. Then he saw the corner of another bundle beneath the ammunition, smaller, more delicate. He pulled it free, the fabric fraying into strings as he opened it. Inside lay a folded jacket, khaki turned grey with age, its sleeves marked by fading insignia. A patch hung loosely from one shoulder, a division emblem from World War II. Harold didn't need to read it to know what it meant. This wasn't from his war. It was from someone else's. Another man's silence. He ran his thumb across the cloth, feeling the ghost of the soldier who had worn it. Next to the jacket lay a few medals, bent, their ribbon stained but still faintly red and blue. A bronze star. A purple heart. The colors caught the grey daylight like a dying ember. Then, at the very bottom of the box, he found what stopped him cold. Letters. Dozens of them, tied with a strip of crumbling twine. The edges were soft, the paper brittle. He lifted the bundle with both hands, careful as though it might break apart. One envelope came loose and slid into his palm. The handwriting was graceful, looping cursive pressed deep into the paper. The date, December 1944. He unfolded it. Read the first line. "My dearest Anna, the nights are cold here, and the men are tired, but I still dream of your garden." The words trembled faintly, as if the ink still carried the heartbeat of the man who wrote them. Harold read on, about longing, about fear, about the promise to come home when the fighting ended. He stopped halfway through. His own hands were shaking, because he had written the same words once. Different war. Same ache. Same hope. He pressed the letter against his knee, staring at the soil, trying to steady his breathing. The world around him seemed to fade. No birds, no distant traffic, only the steady rhythm of his pulse and the whisper of wind through the oak tree. He imagined the soldier who had buried this box. Maybe he'd returned home, like Harold did, unable to face what he'd brought back. Maybe he couldn't live with the noise, so he gave the war a grave in his own backyard. Or maybe he never made it back at all. Harold tied the letters together again and placed them gently beside the box. His eyes burned, but no tears came. Instead there was a deep, wordless sorrow, one that stretched far beyond his own story. For years he had believed his memories were his alone to bear. But now, in his yard, he had unearthed proof that another man had carried the same weight, in another time, under another flag. He looked at the house, the porch, the flagpole, the neat rows of his garden, and suddenly everything felt fragile. The ground he'd walked on, the silence he'd built around himself, the calm routines of an old soldier trying to live like the war was over. But the past doesn't disappear. It waits, quietly, until someone digs. Harold took one last look at the open box and whispered, almost to himself, "You couldn't leave it behind either, could you?" Then he closed the lid, the rusted hinges groaning in protest, and sat in the wet grass beside it. The morning air was cool against his face. The shovel lay nearby, half buried in mud. The earth was still again, but Harold's world had shifted forever. The night after Harold found the letters, sleep refused him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the same images, the rusted grenades, the faded medals, the handwriting from 1944 that still pulsed with life. He would drift off for seconds, only to wake at the faintest sound, half expecting the ground itself to breathe. By dawn, his decision was made. He brewed his coffee, but didn't drink it. The cup cooled beside the phone while he stared out the window toward the top-covered box in the yard. For years he'd carried his own memories in silence. But this was bigger than one man's ghosts. It was danger. Real, physical danger. The kind that could kill without warning. His hand hovered over the phone for a long moment before pressing the numbers. "Sheriff's office, how can I help you?" Harold cleared his throat. His voice came out low, deliberate. "This is Harold Wilson, out on County Road 9. I found something in my yard. I think it might be military." There was a pause on the line. Then questions. Careful, cautious questions. What did it look like? How deep was it buried? Any sign of explosives? "Yes," he said quietly. "Ammunition. Grenades. Old. Real old." The dispatcher's tone shifted instantly. "Stay inside, sir. Don't touch it. We'll send someone right away." Within the hour, 2 police cars rolled up his driveway, lights flashing softly but without sirens. The officers moved carefully, voices low, eyes scanning the yard. When Harold led them behind the shed and lifted the top, their faces changed. Curiosity gave way to alarm. One of them stepped back immediately and radioed for a bomb squad. Harold stood off to the side, arms folded, watching as the quiet of his life dissolved into motion. Soon a heavy truck arrived, dull grey, marked with yellow hazard stripes. Men in protective gear climbed out, calm but focused, their movements sharp and practiced. They examined the box, murmuring to each other in clipped tones. One knelt beside it, gently brushing away loose dirt with a gloved hand. "Where did you say you found this, sir?" another asked. "About a foot down," Harold said. "Been sitting there longer than I've been alive, maybe." The man nodded, expression unreadable. World War II, most likely. Could be unstable. That word, unstable, made Harold's stomach knot. He thought of his grandsons, their small boots stomping on that mound just last summer. The laughter. The danger beneath them all along. The team worked methodically, lifting the box and setting it on a thick rubber sheet. They moved the ammunition and grenades into sealed containers, marking each with bright red tags. One of them noticed the folded jacket and medals and set them aside with surprising care. The letters, too, collected, placed in a clear archival envelope. Harold stood silent the entire time, watching, listening, feeling the strange mixture of relief and mourning that came when something buried too long finally met daylight. When they were done, the lead officer approached him. "You did the right thing, Mr. Wilson. If anyone else had hit that box with a shovel, or if the soil had shifted a little more," he didn't finish the sentence. "He didn't need to." Harold nodded. "What happens to it now?" "The explosives will be disposed of safely," the man said. "The rest, letters, medals, those will be preserved. They deserve that much." By afternoon, the yard was empty again. Only dark soil and a few shovel marks showed what had happened. Neighbors lingered near their fences, whispering. A local reporter drove by, camera in hand, but Harold waved him off. He wasn't ready to talk. Not yet. Later that evening, the sheriff himself stopped by. He was a big man, kind eyes, hat in hand. He told Harold that records suggested a World War II veteran had once owned the property, a man who'd served in France and returned home in 1946. "My guess," the sheriff said quietly, "is he buried it himself. Couldn't throw it away. Couldn't live with it either." Harold looked past him toward the open yard, where the mound used to stand. "Yeah," he murmured. "I think I understand that." A week later, the story hit the local newspaper. Iowa veteran unearths hidden World War II cache in backyard. The photo showed Harold beside the police chief, the rusted box between them. The article spoke of danger avoided, but also of memory preserved. Soon after, the town council proposed a small ceremony at the Veterans Memorial. The mayor called personally. "We'd like you to say a few words," she said, "about what you found, about what it means." Harold hesitated. He had spent most of his life avoiding words like that, but something in the tone of her voice, something respectful, almost reverent, made him agree. After all, silence had already said enough. The day of the ceremony arrived warm and still. A gentle wind lifted the flag at the town's Veterans Memorial, and sunlight spilled over the names etched in stone. Rows of folding chairs filled the square, occupied by familiar faces, neighbors, friends, other veterans wearing caps heavy with pins and years. Children held small flags that fluttered like fragile promises. Harold stood at the edge of it all, holding a single letter, one from the box he had found. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded, but the words were still there, steady and alive. "My dearest Anna." He hadn't planned to speak long. He wasn't a man of speeches. But when the mayor introduced him, a man who uncovered not just history, but a reminder of who we are, Harold felt something shift inside him. He stepped up to the podium, the letter trembling slightly in his hand, and took a slow breath. "I spent my life trying to bury things," he began. His voice was rough but clear. "Memories, fears, faces I couldn't save. I thought silence was strength. I thought forgetting was healing." He looked up. Faces turned toward him, young, old, listening. "But a few weeks ago," he continued, "I found a mound in my yard. Been there for years. I ignored it, the way we ignore things we don't want to face. Then one morning I dug, and the earth answered." He told them about the rusted box, the ammunition, the uniform, the medals. But mostly he spoke about the letters. About the words of a soldier who had written from the cold, promising to come home. About how those words sounded exactly like his own letters from a different war. "I realized something," he said quietly. "Time changes uniforms, but not the weight they carry. Not the hope. Not the fear. Not the love that waits at home." A hush fell across the crowd. A single gust of wind rippled the flags, as if the air itself was listening. He unfolded the letter, reading a few lines aloud, the soldier's promise to return, his longing for his wife, his prayer that the war would end soon. The words floated into the silence like a hymn. When he lowered the page, several people were crying. Even the younger veterans, the ones who thought they'd left their emotions behind on distant soil, looked away, blinking hard. Harold folded the letter and set it gently on the podium. "The man who buried that box, He didn't do it out of fear, he said. He did it because sometimes the only way to keep living is to hide what hurts too much to hold. But the earth doesn't forget. Sooner or later, it gives it back. He paused, his throat tightening. Maybe that's not a curse. Maybe that's grace. When the ceremony ended, the medals, the jacket, and the letters were placed in a glass case at the local museum. A plaque beneath them read, "To the unknown soldier, and to those who keep memory alive." Harold stood quietly as the crowd dispersed. Children pressed close to the glass, eyes wide, as their parents explained that these weren't just old things, but stories, real lives once lived in color. He smiled faintly, then walked home alone. The yard greeted him in silence. The soil where the mound had stood was level now, smooth and calm. The garden shimmered with late light, the shed leaned peacefully in its old age, and the flag out front caught the last streaks of the sunset. Harold sat on the porch steps, hands resting on his knees, and watched the sky burn gold and then fade to blue. The letters from the box, and one of his own old letters to Ellen, lay beside him. Two different lives, two voices separated by decades, now bound by the same truth, that the past doesn't vanish when buried. It waits to be honored. The cicadas began their chorus, the night settling in gentle and familiar. For the first time in years, Harold didn't feel haunted by silence. He felt accompanied by it. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and let the cool air fill his lungs. The war, the ghosts, the buried box, all part of the same long story. The earth had spoken. And at last, he'd listened.